Hey everybody, did you know that your DNA is made up of 23 pairs of chromosomes? That's why the name of this week's sponsor of Still Untitled is named 23andMe. 23andMe is a personalized genetic service that helps you understand what your DNA says about you. With 23andMe, you get more than 60 personalized detailed reports of your health, traits, and ancestry. And here's how it works. You order your DNA kit from 23andme.com, provide your saliva sample from home, and mail it back with the CLIA certified lab, mail it to their lab. And then you'll be notified when your reports are already online. More than 1 million people around the world have experienced their genetics through 23andMe. So order your kit today from 23andme.com. And thank you for listening to this podcast. On with the show.
Welcome to Still Untitled, the Adam Savage Project. I am Will.
I am Adam.
And I am Norm.
Hello, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Man, that swim back from Alcatraz is really long.
It was so cold. It was only about 55 minutes. It went faster than I thought.
It was, but you get a little extra push off all the bodies floating in the bay who tried to escape before.
Well, the thing about it, though, for me, that was the hard part was punching the sharks in the nose to get them to not eat us. There are a lot of sharks off San Francisco right now.
Yeah, there's a whole thing going on. So I came across this thing recently, and I can't remember where it was, whether it was off the Farallones or whether it was off of Guadalupe, but there was an orca attack on a great white.
Oh, I saw this.
Nice.
And one of the great whites nearby was tagged, so they got to see its reaction to one of its compadres getting attacked by an orca.
I mean, the movements. Like
Yeah.
track its
Like
okay.
what its reaction was.
And
basically.
orcas are like insanely smart, right? You understand this? They have a full culture. They have family units. They have adjustable hierarchies among themselves.
They're giant dolphins, right?
Yeah, they're crazy, crazy intelligent. And actually, they're reviled by, from what I understand, by native hunters above the Arctic Circle for being wasteful hunters. They actually will kill for the sport and only eat the tongue of a whale and stuff like that.
Wow.
So let's keep them in a zoo and amuse for more
don't even get me
amusement.
started on that crap. But one of the great whites that was nearby that was tagged immediately upon the attack, this great white that wasn't being attacked dropped to 70 meters and swam to Hawaii.
Wait, what?
Wow.
Yeah.
It was like some bad stuff's going on here.
Right.
I got to get the hell out of town.
Right.
So amygdala,
amazing, I know.
fight or flight?
Right.
Flight.
So you just think of. I start to think about all the things about what it's like to be a different kind of animal, right? Like we move around the world, we understand the topography of our world. We have proprioception and situational awareness, and so does a shark. But in the open ocean, it's a completely different awareness than we have. There's warmth, there's cold, there's currents, and all of this is information to it that is a landscape.
Yeah.
Built inside its head about where it goes, and it goes right to frickin' Hawaii.
Well, I mean, if I had the option to drop the anchor and go to Hawaii whenever I wanted, I would probably do that too. But the thing that always amazes me about the ocean is there's a few billion more years of evolution that have happened there. So it is a much more intense, evolutionary, complex, competitive environment than we see on land.
Don't knock Aquaman. That's all that stuff.
Dude,
How
Aquaman's
does he
still
control
weak
whales?
sauce,
How does he
man.
control whales? They're mammals.
Yeah. He's
It's not just fish.
I mean,
it's through the currents.
look,
of course.
if you're ranking the Justice League, it's like Superman and Batman are tied for first, and Wonder Woman is a real close second, and then it's like a three-way tie for fifth place, followed by Aquaman bringing up the rear on a couple of dolphins with a leash.
2/3 of the Earth landscape. He rules.
Yeah, it's the bad 2/3.
King Arthur. Speaking of flight, did you guys see that video that Emirates Airlines put out?
No.
Is it about Sultan class?
No, well, it's not about Sultan class. And you've flown.
I flew Emirates
Emirates.
to Abu Dhabi this
Yes,
summer and back, and it was amazing.
And to promote their airline, they put out this video, which by the time
is it
this
the
video,
Jennifer Aniston one?
It's the jetpack one. They pulled this stunt, and you have to watch it. I mean, it has like 1 million views on YouTube already. But they had two guys with the wing jetpacks fly. I got maybe within 200 feet of the airplane with the city in the background.
That's
banking.
terrifying.
What?
Yes. I don't know the exact distance, but it was so close.
So
it was months of planning.
Wow.
For like a 1.5 minute long video. but they had another helicopter, another plane flying behind it to capture all of it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The flight time on those even the wing jetpacks isn't great. It's like,
not
what,
great.
a couple minutes?
So I don't know what the altitude was. Don't know how fast they were flying. It was
Well over 100.
But
But
even-
if it's a plane, they're
It
going
has to
well
be.
over 150, 200 miles an hour, right
If
around
it's like,
200
especially if
miles
it's a
an hour.
777 or a 747 or
And it's
787.
coming in for a landing. Or
Yeah.
it's, right.
and it's two of them, and it's not like when they're about to land. They're clearly miles above the city.
Oh, so they must have jumped out of a plane.
Yeah.
They jumped out of a plane.
Oh my God.
And then got
This-
close.
I find this
and then
upsetting
put on
just
the
thinking
jetpack.
about it.
How many of these guys did they go through before they got the shot?
Well, they got at least two survived.
This is right. It's a hobby with like a 40% mortality rate.
Right. I saw a jetpack video of a guy flying inside a mall the other day. Like it looked like he was in a multi-tier
Was he
mall
in
with
one of the
he was in the
downforce,
downward
right,
flying,
like a
the old school
hydrogen
kind.
peroxide
Yeah.
type of thing.
And that was terrifying. This sounds much worse.
Jetpacks are not our future.
No.
I saw Tomorrowland. I know what happens when you have jetpack futures.
Oh, Tomorrowland.
I also saw.
Did you like Tomorrowland?
Look,
Tomorrowland.
I like the idea behind
I
Tomorrowland.
totally did too, and I loved the girl. I thought she was great.
Oh, the girl was fantastic.
It's
The robot girl,
brilliant.
It's lovely. The whole movie is lovely. It's
I
shot
love
really beautifully.
What's his name? Tim McGraw. Tim McGraw.
Yeah.
Tim McGraw. Bless Tim McGraw for building an acting career. I think he must have said to somebody, "Can you get me in some of those movies in which I get to play the same character every single time?"
Dad.
And
Yeah.
it's
Older
like
maker dad.
rugged country dad. Man, he plays that to a perfection that I feel like Dennis Quaid must look at and be like, "God damn it!"
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is the Dennis Quaid role. A lot of character actors. You like, yeah.
And McGraw plays it really low, and he's very super compelling. It's just anyway.
I didn't like the premise of the movie either.
I like the idea that all the smarts went away, and that's why everything went to hell in the 60s.
From what I understand from behind the scenes, Disney put out a different film than they bought.
I can see. I mean,
Because they bought the Jeff Jensen script.
The script was a lot darker.
What even? Wait, the filming script.
Yeah, the third act was darker than what we saw.
Wow.
Even so, here's my fundamental problem with that movie, and I'm sorry we're now talking about Tomorrowland. It was a movie about the idea of optimism, which itself was not optimistic.
that was my complaint. That was my complaint. Like, and it didn't show you. I wanted to see more of the optimistic future before we had the dark third act. I would have been okay with the dark third act if
also-
they gave us a promise.
Also, there wasn't. Yeah,
we're not doing a spoiler cast
Yeah,
of
no, no,
Tomorrowland.
no. It doesn't not worthy.
We can
It-
move
it
on.
just-
from
yeah.
Sorry, Bradbury.
Tomorrowland.
But
Incredibles is really good.
Did you guys notice my Ryan Nagata gloves here?
Oh, I didn't.
people got to watch the video for this.
Yeah.
We're going to do a video of this. I recently collected a new spacesuit by my new friend and master spacesuit replicator Ryan Nagata. Is it Nagata or Nagata?
Nagata, I think.
Okay.
Now we met Ryan. I met Ryan at the RPF prop party this year, which was at Frank's shop. And there's actually a video on Tested where I chat with Ryan about his spacesuits. He had a Mercury suit, so he has one he built while you were building yours, completely independent.
Yep.
But they look almost exactly the same.
Well, actually, when you get up close, there are many ways in which his is far more accurate than mine.
Really?
Ryan's fidelity to detail absolutely gobsmacks me.
And we'll do a full video about this spacesuit. But one of the things is the hardware on the suits. Is the
little
replica of the
buckles
hardware.
and stuff like this is incredible. His labels, he even, and I love this, to make sure no one might ever sell one of his pieces as original, he puts repro on the serial numbers of everything.
Nice.
That's
Nice.
if you showed me a picture of the spacesuit that's sitting over there on my pool table, I would have a hard time telling you whether it was original or not.
It's breathtaking.
It's breathtaking, even
Yeah.
up close. And so I visited Ryan. So on our way to Mojave this week, I stopped at Ryan's shop down in Los Angeles to pick up this suit. And we spent about an hour there for the fitting and talking about stuff. And I got to see some of his methods up close. And it's we're going to do a one-day build with Ryan in January.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And it's really like just an incredible craftsperson. I'm really blown away by his work, and I'm so proud to have added this stuff to my. I mean, he molded these gloves from scratch. These were from a mold he made. All the sewing he does. He weathers everything with the mixture of acrylic paint and Portland cement, which he then takes back off so that it feels like it's a suit that's been cleaned for museum.
What one of the things I didn't know about from the Apollo suits is they have this. There's a like an outer covering, and then there's the thin rubber gloves. I assume that that's so that you could actually move your fingers and pick things up.
Yeah, and it's the gloves are one of the just most difficult interfaces of a spacesuit. Most astronauts in doing long spacewalks eventually lose fingernails because of the amount of stress on the fingers out at the end, and it's really difficult to make something that's both can handle the PSI load of a spacesuit, but also yield some sensitivity in the fingers. And you guys have held a real space glove. I have not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have never touched a real.
We got to put our hands in one.
Yeah, there weren't any gloves when I was in Huntsville.
Right.
Just to be clear, it wasn't a flown space glove. That they let
that's
us put our
fine.
hands
No,
in. It was one that they use in the pool in Houston.
Yeah.
But it was right around the time that you were building that vacuum glove box, and the experience was very similar, even unpressurized. It was hard to grip.
Yeah.
Like I assume that like when you're an astronaut, you know you're going to be doing spacewalks. You spend a lot of time with one of those rock climbing finger strengthening exercises.
Stress balls.
Yeah.
Chris has said it's just some of the most stressful work possible. Yeah, in the interview we did during the Martian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Entire body, not just your hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
Wraps
other
nonstop.
thing that Ryan did is he puts loops in the costume to give it the structure that the real spacesuit has. So lying on my pool table, it actually looks like it's full of a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know this is terrible, tantalizing
Sorry,
for us
guys.
to look over the camera at a
it's so
great thing,
cool
but we
over there.
will do a video.
It's
of it.
really gorgeous. It's the nicest thing I've seen so far today. So
And one of the things, as you were showing us photos from your trip, is before we show the video, is his workspace. The thing that you really wanted to point out was you don't need a lot of workspace, a big shop, even a shop this size, to build something this amazing.
No, Ryan has from what I saw, he's got a couple of folding tables and like a row of cabinets, and that's the entirety of his shop. He keeps a very neat workspace. I know that it can probably get messy like anybody's, but he's got he seems to have a really quite impeccable working process. It's really exciting.
I can't wait to see the video that you guys do with him. I'm really stoked.
Now, a couple weeks ago, when we did the podcast about the announcement that Mythbusters was ending, and you shared some of your immediate thoughts, and you're still kind of in that wave of the news being released, we asked listeners out there to send us questions. And so I think today we're going to devote half this podcast asking you some of those questions. And we asked people on Twitter. So always send us emails, questions for Adam in the subject line. Send us notes on Twitter.
It's podcast@tested.com is the email address.
That's the one, podcast@tested.com. And we'll get those, Adam, when we can. We'll do these occasionally. But one of the questions that came up is... I'm actually paraphrasing it. Now that the final season of Mythbusters is done, and you're interested in producing more, what are the stories you want to tell? What kind of stories when you produce? And this is from Jack.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So when you talk about stories, producing stories, you mean for television?
For television, that's right.
Since I haven't started producing anything yet, it's an open question. For me, I'm always interested in the narrative that feels genuine. That's always been the one of the guiding lights of storylines and story direction on Mythbusters. Is this going to feel like it's a genuinely organic direction, or does it feel like we're over egging the pudding because we're not sure the audience is going to be interested at this point?
Well, one of the things we always found on Tested is that people respond best to the stuff that is the most real.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And it's difficult for an editor in another building to know what's genuine to me on the ground, and vice versa. So on Mythbusters, there was always a lot of discussion between the producers who were writing the episodes back in Sydney, Australia, my co-executive producer, Dan, in Manchester, and on the ground in San Francisco. What I like to imagine is, what I hope is that as a producer, I will be able, because I love the whole process of the production, to really bridge that gap between what's going on camera and how that's actually applying to the story that's being told. I know it's the most broad, general possible answer, but
So you're saying you want to be involved?
And we should also give a shout out to I forget his name. Sorry, the Popular Mechanics editor,
Jim Miggs,
who wrote an editorial for the New York Times this week as we're recording the podcast, talking about why we should thank Mythbusters. And I think he puts in the words great in really appropriate detail why the storytelling that you guys did resonated, and
over the years we fought off a lot of storylines that weren't organic and didn't make sense, or they seemed to make superficial sense, but when you actually started to execute them, it feels weird, and you got to be ready to listen to that. I watch a lot of reality television these days, and what I see is that's good enough. We can use that to move on.
Yeah.
And
or the hooked together sentences, right? Anytime you see coverage over a confessional type video, that means that probably, those people wear the same clothes in all their confessional videos for a reason, and they take something from episode 35 and something from episode 3 and jam them together, so you sound like a horrible person.
And the stakes at the end of the commercial breaks and all of those conventions, I think it's reasonable to want to give people a reason to tune back in after the commercial break, but it doesn't have to be the end of the world.
I guess that's the difference between the structured and unstructured reality programming, as the Emmys see it.
Right. But at the same time, the producers still need to give a structure to everything.
Yeah. The thing for me, the thing that I love about Mythbusters, and I came to it late because I didn't. I was exactly the wrong age to be exposed to you guys. Right, I was too old at the beginning and not enough kids until late.
Right.
But the thing that I love is I never needed to know if you could put enough cornstarch in water to walk on it, but I learned enough interesting stuff along the way that it was really gratifying.
Yeah.
And then the payoff was always good, right? So there was always, you guys always had a good punch, like the punchline at the end of the bit was always worth hanging around for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about the production, and one question from Anson is, can you give a sample itinerary of like a filming day? Have you guys ever shot a full behind the scenes? Here's what goes on in a day of Mythbusters.
We have a behind the scenes episode in the final season to show fans about what it really is like to make an episode of Mythbusters.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I just did.
What are they going to do? Fire you?
So on an average day, let's say it's a location shoot. We did some work with a helicopter down in Pacifica a couple of weeks ago.
So this is a San Francisco. You have two kinds of location shoots too, right? You have some that are local that you can drive to. You sleep in your house.
Most that are like that. 95% are local and drivable.
And then sometimes you're in Mojave. Sometimes
I was
you're
in Mojave
Ione.
earlier this week.
Yeah.
That was our last location shoot ever. Wow. So on a standard location shoot, I get a pin from my producer about where to go, and we all agree on a start time. The start time will depend on how much daylight we get, on how complicated the shoot day looks. In general, if you have to accomplish more than 2 specific things in a day, it's going to be a rough day. And
when you say things, you mean like blowing
explosions.
something up.
If you have to blow something up,
Yeah.
blowing up more than 2 things in a day is really difficult.
Norm and I went out to the bomb range once for a blow up day, and while the final explosion was really compelling, it was 6 hours of kind of hanging around waiting for something to explode.
So, and there are things that are part of every single day. There is an arrival. There is a where are we and what are we doing? There is a what are the parameters of this experiment more specifically? There is what do we expect to see? What do we predict we'll see? What will the results of what we see, how will that affect where we are within this story? Then there's shooting the setup, shooting the execution, shooting the Jamie and I splitting tasks.
Are all those things you just went through things that you do with the crew before? You're not talking about shooting stuff necessarily.
No, yeah. So,
that's all shooting stuff.
These
Okay.
are all things that have to be buttoned down. So let's say let's actually forget about the helicopter day in San Francisco. Let's say we're blowing stuff up at the bomb range. So we'll go out to the bomb range, and the first thing we do is an arrival. Where are we? Actually, the first thing we do is an arrival of Jamie and I either driving in, walking in, coming in on stilts, whatever. Yeah. Then there's a piece to camera from one of us, and we call those pieces to camera PMTs, which stands for pre or post match talk, like in a sports show. It is a term that is completely unique to Mythbusters that one of our producers came up with more than a decade ago, and we still use it. So I'll do a PMT to camera about where are we? We're at the Alameda County Sheriff's Bomb Range. This is our secondary shop. We've blown up a bunch of stuff out here. Today, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Then you'd probably cut to Jamie doing something, talking more specifically about what we're doing. We're going to take C4, we're going to put it up against the steel plate, we're going to see what happens when we do this. Our theory is blah, 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 blah. Now, in general, it's hard to sustain editorially a piece to camera that's more than 45 seconds to a minute long.
Yeah.
So if the story is really complicated, Steve Christensen, our director, and I will sit there and figure out, we can't tell all this story in one shot. It's going to take like 90 seconds and there's too many pieces. So you try to think about how not to overtire the audience in terms of how much information you've got to impart. So we'll do one piece to camera and we'll say, this is the broad rudiments of this experiment. Then once we get into the build where all of a sudden I'm handling the, let's say, key piece that is the experiment, I'll say, we've chosen this for these reasons.
Okay.
Because it's the best or the worst case scenario. And all of this has to be worked out on the fly. I mean, all we've had slated is we go out and we're going to blow up this thing twice.
But you know what the pieces are, and you can put it together on the fly.
Right.
Is it a map in your head, kind of? Like
yeah. So Dan Tapster, the executive producer, co-executive producer, will write an outline. Dan's and my relationship is such that we think along very similar lines. I almost never read his outlines, but come to pretty much the exact same conclusion in my head.
Well, you guys have been working together for a really long time.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, that's so much fun. It's like showing up on location and be like, all right, how do we get into this? Yeah. Great. Why don't I do this? Why don't I come in so every time I'm doing something, personally, I'm doing something that isn't explaining what the myth is, I'm calling it color. So this is color. Just like I'm having fun. So I brought my one-wheel skateboard. Let's shoot me doing some slaloms. I'm getting to ride in a helicopter. So here's what I'm thinking. And like when we did the helicopter shoot a couple weeks ago, I had to throw Buster out of the helicopter. And I just had this image in my head of how I wanted to do it. And that was the only thing I knew when I arrived on location. Yeah. And I turned to Steve-O and I was like, I don't know how we're going to get into this, but when we're in the helicopter and Buster's got to go out, here's how I want him to leave. And Steve was like, oh, that's great. Let's do it. And then we figure out how to put that into a framework. And so it's like we do make it up every single day on the fly, on location.
What I like is that it's a form of working the problem. But you're working the story problem.
Exactly. And so we'll have vigorous discussions where, we'll say too much in a piece to camera. And Steve's sitting there listening and he's going, there's like 3 facts too many. Let's bring those in later. Let's do those after you've been working for a while. And now so it's like, I'm building something and sometimes Steve will say, well, can you talk about what you're building? And I'll say, actually, it won't be apparent to the audience. If I describe this as a castle, but it's just a piece of wood right now, it won't make sense. So wait till it looks half like a castle, and then I'll talk about it.
Right. Do you and Jamie often do those PMTs? Do you both record them so that then the editors can kind of choose what they're doing, or do you do a couple of takes and then let the editors cut back and forth as they need to, or whatever?
We actually, it's the latter. We try not to overlap the stuff we do. We'll both do predictions. We'll both do, here's what this might mean to the story, because we might have different takes on that, and that's interesting.
Yeah,
but we try not to overlap. Like it's often, one of us will give a general piece about the whole thing, and the other host will do a deeper elaboration. We'll also sometimes do what we call multi-part PMTs, where, for instance, in the finale episode, the final episode ever of Mythbusters, there is a sequence that is incredibly complex that involves hundreds and hundreds of pieces of something that we built, many different things that we built, and it has to be contextualized before we execute it. And that contextualization can't last more than
45 seconds.
2 minutes. We got 2 minutes to contextualize this. But boy, for contextualizing something that takes place over this incredibly long distance we had, I know I'm teasing the hell out of it.
This is mean for something that's not going to air until next year. Yeah.
It was you know, it was one of these things where it was like, how are we going to get through all of this? And then we just started and we realized, oh, no, I can't do a front and a back for each one. We're just going to have to cut. So then there's the question of, well, how are we going to edit this? You'll notice a lot of times the camera will swing on to me and swing off and be in that swing
or
back
zoom
to
in
Jamie.
and zoom out. And,
yeah. So that's all choices made on the set, depending on what the day looks like. And, you know, Scott Sorensen, our A camera, is super deeply obsessed with film and with photography, so he'll have his own ideas. He'll often storyboard key shots he wants that day. Oh, and then there's second camera, what we call second camera, which is second through 16th camera.
Is this like, it's not like second location filming? It's not like
no. This isn't second unit. This is, we're going to cover this. Saz is going to cover it on the Sony XD, the big camera, but we're also going to cover it on a couple of FSs. We're going to cover it on a bunch of Blackmagics and then a bunch of GoPros and a bunch of CXs. And all of these cameras have different purposes for us. The CXs have the best sound. So if we have a driving shot, the CX goes in the car because it's got the best sound for the dialogue that I'm saying while I'm driving, because I'm way too far away for my soundo to get that.
Of course.
The Blackmagics are great for the depth of field. GoPros for the stuff where they might get destroyed. And, you know, we only have three cameramen. There's Scott, there's Duncan, and there's Willie. And those guys will set up 16 cameras that all have to be set rolling before we execute an experiment, at which point we've got 45 minutes or we have to stop them all and reload their SD cards and start again.
Right.
That's an editing challenge. That's an amazing. You're talking about just the pre-production and then the post.
Well, and the post producers will get lists of where the key shots are, what was covered, and how it was covered. Most of the time, sometimes they'll just get 40 hours of raw footage, but a good portion of the time they're getting a lot of context for this.
Do you have somebody on, like a lot of times when Norm and I have been on location on shoots, do you have somebody there sitting that's just ingesting footage and noting what each thing is, or do you just send them terabytes of video?
So the cameramen are logging each SD card and each disc as they're shooting it. They're carefully logging what's on it and where that places within the story. But still a slog for someone to go through. And then when we watch the rough cuts, we will still keenly remember awesome shots.
Yeah.
And if they're not in the rough cut, we'll call up and be like, we think you guys might have missed something. And sure, sometimes that happens. Sometimes when all the tapes, they'll be like, oh, I didn't realize that at the 30-second mark of this execution of the experiment, there was a really awesome thing where something flew through the air. Okay, let's put that in.
Logging is so important for everything, whether you're shooting photos, video. That's what I love on some of those DSLRs where you can record an audio clip to attach to each photo.
Yeah.
And it's when professional photographers take photos at events and then record names and context.
Yeah.
And,
so the other thing that's happening is obviously we have lunch, so they'll take a lunch order. We'll order out most of the time. And then...
you mean Jamie's not in the back making ham sandwiches during breaks?
Pretty much not.
Okay.
And then, there's how do you wrap out of the sequence?
Right.
And that also changes depending on the result we got. We might,
Because you don't know what's going to happen. You have a good idea, probably.
So sometimes there'll be a question as to, well, what happens if everything works beautifully?
Yeah.
We don't get enough screen time. And I am never one who's I'm like, well, then we don't get enough screen time. We'll put in another sequence or something.
Yeah.
But I don't want to pad and do a dumb experiment just to make sure that we're covered. And pretty much almost every time something goes wrong anyway. And there's this wonderful double-edged swords where something goes wrong and we're like, damn it, something's gone wrong. But it's like, oh, but it went wrong in a really cool way. So now I know we're home free today. And sometimes that happens at 11 in the morning, but sometimes it doesn't happen until 3 p.m. And like, we've had days where we show up to do something and it worked perfectly on the first try, and we're like, oh, crap. We now don't have enough footage for the third act of the show.
Yeah, you can't do a 36-minute episode of a 43-minute show, it turns out.
Exactly. But that's rare. I mean, because we're covering everything as it's happening, it's really rare that we finish a day without enough screen time.
Do you find it's safer to under-prepare then in that case? Or does it just work itself out?
This is an interesting thing. I am interested in under-preparing simply because I want what's going to happen to have a veracity to it.
And be fresh.
Yeah. But at the same time, I recognize that I get that luxury because my partners in the show, like Steve-O and Dan, are thinking and over-preparing. As is their job. So we get to that tension is important. If I was left totally in charge and I was under preparing everything, I'm sure I would screw stuff up. But, we are a very well-oiled production machine, and we know, Steve and I will start a day and I'll be like, what do we have to finish in this sequence? Well, it's a 14-minute sequence. Oh, it's a 14-minute story. Okay, well, so then today should be about between 5 and 7 minutes. Yeah, it's going to be 6 minutes. And then we'll finish the day and I'll be like, man, we got 9 minutes today. Yeah. So we've got a bunch for new media to put online when the episode airs. Or we only got 4 minutes today. We're going to need to take tomorrow's sequence that we're shooting. We're going to need to add some color and some deeper explanation into some of the parts of it in order to build up that screen time.
Fascinating.
It's so much fun to make this stuff up on the. It's really, I'm going to miss the crap out of it.
It's like improv.
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah. So, arrive, get a cup of coffee. Steve and I start walking around and be like, well, how are we going to get into this? And it's just I just love it.
Is there any stuff that you do every day? Like, is there a safety briefing at the beginning of the day or anything like that? Or
There is a safety briefing at the beginning of every single location day, and we always did safety briefings for dangerous stuff. Mm-hmm. But the Cannonball episode is one that initiated the safety briefing for everything. Yeah. And it covers right down to keep your sunscreen on. Put it on in the morning, put it on again at lunch, put it on again at 3 o'clock. Look, we're out in Ione, California. Watch out for potholes created by cows walking. Watch out for the mud. There are rattlesnakes. And it's hot out here. So if you get too hot, go ahead and spend some time in the RV. We'll often rent an RV if it's a 95-degree day to give people a place to decompress. Yeah. So that safety meeting will cover. It not only covers what's going to be dangerous, but it gets everyone on the crew on the same page about what's happening. First, we're going to do this. Then we're going to set up this. Then we're going to bring out the bicycles and do the third thing. And then we're going to do, hopefully, by right after lunch, we'll set off the explosion.
Well, and it means that nobody feels bad if they start to feel a little off and need to go get in the shade and drink some water for 5 minutes. It doesn't mess anybody up.
It's the work ethic on our crew is such that it's hard to convince people to go take a breather. It really is. And it's totally vitally important. And I am unabashed about that. Like, put your camera down and go take a breath.
It'll be much more of an inconvenience if you pass out and you have to get the paramedics out and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. That was a long answer.
We have a lot more questions. Want to continue questions in a future episode?
Let's continue questions in a future episode. Maybe the one after this.
Yeah.
So there's not all questions.
2 answers, I think. There.
Yeah, we had 2.
Maybe 3
answers. It's okay.
That was a big question.
It was a big question. The typical Mythbusters day is a great question because I will say this. A good friend of mine's worked in television for well over 2 decades and says there is no other show he's ever been on the set of that works like we do. That we're a tiny crew, relatively, not much more than 8 to 12 people on a busy day. And we really show up with such a loose plan and make it so up as we go that that's why the show feels like it does. That's why it feels genuine. And, I love that process so much. It is going to be a process that I'm going to try and impose on every other show I work on because I think it works.
Norm and I both started out on magazines working on small niche publications with very small teams by magazine standards. We'd have 5 people that produced 50 pages of magazine a month.
Right.
And not sending out assignments and taking articles back, and then people actually writing 50 pages of magazine. When you tell somebody at Wired or a big publication, I wrote 14 pages of magazine last month, they're like, you're out of your mind. How did you do that? and the thing that I learned is that when you take a small team of people that are all highly invested in the end product, then you can do things that are truly amazing.
Yeah.
And would be impossible it doesn't scale is the only bad news.
And it's difficult to scale. And that's the thing that is one of the things I'm going to miss the most is this crew. This crew we have is so tight and so amazing and so dedicated. They are all thrilled by every aspect of the process as much as I am. And I know I've said it before, but I really hope I can keep this crew busy. That's my goal.
Hey, we'll have a lot more projects next year.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
There we go.
And on that note, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to this episode of Still Untitled. Please send us your questions. You can tweet us at testedcom or send us an email podcast at tested. What is it?
podcast at tested.com.
like I said,
the
it's
domain
simple as
that the
that.
website is on.
Oh yeah, we have like Gmail podcast at tested.com.
Right. Questions for Adam is what you put in the
Yes.
subject line, then they go in the right
Questions for
folder.
Adam.
Questions for Adam, and we'll be back next week with another episode.
All right.
Bye, guys. Thanks for
guys.
watching.
Bye.